where we're going to be having a conversation and starting off with Catherine and Steve and Becky, the Education Committee. We have lots of people around here. Oh, hello. I'm supposed to be working with this. And we have some folks online, I believe, and we're going to have make comments in the chat, or if you want to say something, unmute yourself. We'll try to keep track of everybody and make sure that the online participants are just as engaged as everybody else. I'm going to turn it over to Catherine and Steve, right?
Get out of the limelight here a little bit, at least so I can see. Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Catherine Kramer, and thank you so much for taking the time, particularly you educators for coming today, but as well our ESEP participants. Yay, we're being recorded. Yeah. So we just wanted to start off real quickly with quick introductions, maybe take just 1 minute to give your name and your role in your particular institute, name of your institution or affiliation, and your role there, just so everybody knows who's in the room. So again, I'm Catherine Kramer, and I am here as part of my work with Associated Universities, Inc. on a project called Nereid, and we'll be talking a lot more about that in a moment.
Yeah, so I'm Steve Uzo. Hello. Hi. So I'm Steve Uzo from the New York College of Science. I'm also helping AUI with this Nereid initiative to look at how converging Earth and space science can really benefit educators and practitioners. I'm really delighted that you guys have shown up for this. We hope to come out of this with some interesting ideas, ideally from you. So.
My name is John Leck. I'm a 8th grade science teacher in Clarksburg, Maryland, and part of Montgomery County.
I'm Robina Deloach. I teach pre-K 2 through 8th grade. This year I have 4th and 5th grade science, engineering, and design.
Hi, I'm Jake Hines, an Earth Systems teacher from Waldorf, Maryland, Thomas Stone High School.
Hi, I'm Patrick Rowley. I also work in Waldorf at St. Charles High School. They have a science center museum. So I work primarily with the NOAA Science on the Sphere exhibit and develop the field trips and execute the field trips there.
Hi, I'm Michelle Weisgerber. I'm at Broadneck High School in Annapolis, Maryland. I am the Environmental Literacy Signature Program Facilitator, so I'm kind of in a resource role working with all of my content area teachers to bring environmental studies into all areas.
Hi, I'm Tamara Ledley, longtime member of the Education Committee, done a lot of teacher professional development and curriculum development around climate change, and I am going to be the president of ESEP this coming year. That is true, a long, long time ago.
Hi, my name is Alice Upremian. I'm actually not a teacher, but I'm a software engineer at JPL, but I do volunteer to teach a lot, and usually for high school or maybe older college students, but I volunteer to teach elementary and I don't really know how to get started with that, so maybe I'm looking for more ideas.
Hi, my name is Raleigh Martin. Currently, I work with the House of Representatives Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. And our committee is developing a policy proposal for March 2020 on ways to address climate change. And one of the areas of interest is in climate science education and earth science education and ways to get data and information to communities that need it.
Hi, I'm Kelsey Braceman. I'm with the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative. I'm not myself an educator, but a lot of my colleagues are professors who are working with graduate level classes who want to involve their students through the course of their studies in our work on accountability through climate data.
Hi, I'm Lisa Dallas and I work for NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. I'm also not an educator. I am the Data and Information Systems Manager for the GLOBE program. Is anyone familiar with that? Okay, so I am just kind of on the fringes of the education piece, but I like to stay informed on how that's evolving.
Hi, I'm Zachary Robbins. I'm a PhD student at North Carolina State, and I'm the Community Fellow for the Community Resiliency Cluster at ESEP.
Hi, I'm Alexis Gertson. I'm a grad student at George Mason, and I'm the community fellow for the data stewardship cluster.
Hi everyone, I'm Ellie Davis. I'm a PhD student at the University of South Carolina studying community resilience and sea level rise with small businesses. And I actually also taught a middle school after school class on geography, which was an experience. And and I'm always excited to learn more, like better ways to do education.
And so Becky, if you wanted to take just a few minutes, I think you said to stop you at 4 minutes.
Well, that'll give me my signal. Can I share my screen?
And do you need to be speaking into the microphone in order to get recorded?
I will speak to this microphone. And I will unmute. Pretending I'm online. You should be able to share now.
Hold on. That shouldn't happen.
I think I'm going through that and this. So I'll so I'll use that.
You want to go through this or that?
I will use your mic instead of mine.
Just unmuted.
All right, you can sort of see this. So this is for folks who don't know a bit about ESIP education, a quick primer in ESIP Ed. What's ESIP education all about, and what the heck are these people doing? We have some objectives. We're a committee in ESIP, so there's different organizations of ESIP. We're a committee. Our big one, the one that we care about right now today, is building the awareness and value of earth science data and data science among educators. So our deal is that we are connecting ESIP partners who have something to say to educators with those educators, and you're seeing that happening right now. We've collected educators to talk to today. We also do teacher professional development, and that is with connecting those partners with teachers who I call in the wild. They're there with students trying to get something done there. We have formal and informal education, and we're doing some curriculum development. Just as an example, more specifics, in 2019, we did some out to lunch webinars. Margaret hosted those. Those were small 10-minute presentations, online webinars where someone would present their tool to a group of educators. They're all recorded online just as a resource and something that would be just a small bite, not take up a lot of time, but still get some interesting information out there. We've been working on a Learn to Code initiative for teachers, trying to get coding into the classroom, into the science classrooms, so we can start talking about data and how we use data. Still working on a little bit of that. And then at our last summer meeting, we worked on Jupyter notebooks and getting educators into some Jupyter notebook tools and how do you use those in the classroom. And we've also had a special project on the side using Pocket Lab Voyagers. We have a teacher identified who's been working with those, making some curriculum, testing them in the classroom, and seeing where we can go with that. Can we have some curriculum development from those? And our plans for 2020, here we are starting. And this is what we're doing. We're collaborating with educators in the DC area who are in this room right now to continue some kind of ongoing relationship connecting together. And the basis for that was that we always do our summer meetings, which I just talked about. But we move around a lot in the summer. So it's hard to continue a relationship with a teacher when we keep moving. So we thought, hey, since we come to the DC area so often, let's find a group of educators who might want to continue a relationship with ESIP. No pressure. If you're here, invited as an educator, you don't have to keep staying with us, but we want to see if that's going to work for everybody. So instead of developing a program and then never seeing somebody again, maybe we'll come back. Maybe we'll talk. Right? And so it's not an official tagline. It's not trademarked or anything. ESIP's tagline is making data matter. ESIP education makes data fun. And we can talk more about what ESIP Ed is. That's my small tidbit of ESIP Ed.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. So Catherine, I think is going to give you a little background on Earth and space science, sort of where we've come from, so that we have a little context, and then we'll talk a little bit about participatory design. And share. We're now sharing. We just need to, oh, there we are.
It's down there. Yay, yay, yay. Okay. Okay, good. Except we sort of zoomed ahead, but that's okay. As I said, I'm Catherine Kramer, and the logo on the lower left is from AUI, the Associated Universities, Inc. On the right is NSF, and we thank both of them for their support in helping to make this happen, as well as, of course, ESIP. And as Becky mentioned, we are hoping that this is the beginning of a beautiful relationship, as somebody said in a movie. Because that would be a really ideal opportunity for what we're hoping to get started today, which is using participatory design to do some tool development. Thank you. And speaking of tools, learning how they all work is helpful. Let's see if I can get it to go. Maybe not. Sorry, guys. Okay.
You have to use the arrow, I guess.
All right, got to use the arrow. All right. I wanted to give you a little background, since we are hoping that we're going to be talking to each other above and beyond today. Where this is all coming from, we have been funded through NSF and the Northeast Big Data Hub on an initiative that is ongoing, and it's called Data Science for All, or DS for All. And our primary goals are developing a community of practice. You are now part of our community of practice. Developing data literacy essential principles, which a lot of you have probably heard, if not all of you. The term data literacy, there isn't one definition of it. This is ongoing work, and part of the reason is because there are so many different sectors that are in need of data literacy. Some of which are community-based organizations. We do a lot of work with nonprofits in and around New York City. We've been working with Bloomberg Data for Good Exchange in that work. Communities of need, we hosted a workshop at the New York Hall of Science last March, and that is also work that is ongoing. And again, I'm happy to talk about any of this more in detail. I just wanted to give you a broad brush idea of where this work is coming out of. And in informal settings, this is a project at the New York Hall of Science that I was involved in. Steve's the PI, called Big Data for Little Kids. That was a really fabulous, fun, and very successful 3-year project to bring families with kids as young as 4 into a 6-week workshop to really learn about the data cycle. And again, happy to talk about that more in detail. I think a paper is just coming out now, just about to be published. Yes. Yeah, on Wiley, and yeah, and that's just one example of the work that's being done in the informal world. And again, working on this data literacy framework, this work really kicked off, it's now 2.5 years ago, with a workshop. And again, this is ongoing, and I can provide everybody a link to that work. And that brings us to one of the reasons, if not the primary reason, that a lot of you are here today, formal education needs. And as I'm sure is obvious to everyone in the room, our mantra is all citizens in the 21st century should be data literate by the time they graduate from high school. That's our kind of benchmark for what being data literate is. Although, of course, as we all know, the purpose of those two images is that kids are being taught very much in the same ways that they were taught, back, whenever, generation or two ago. Even though the needs of the workforce have changed drastically and are changing, as we all know. And that brings us to NERIAD, which is a acronym for Network for Earth Space Research, Education, and Innovation with Data, which is an initiative we're doing with Associated Universities, Inc., AUI. The mission of which is to advance research and innovation through education and engagement with big data in Earth space sciences. And we have a poster out in the poster exhibit area with a lot more information about NERIAD. And we also have a website. I can get you the link to that. So why NERIAD? Why now? This is again about this widening learning and workforce skills gap that we're all so aware of, the changes in experimental design in the research areas, needs of all of the diverse populations that we were just talking about, and this move toward the convergence of disciplines, in this case, Earth and space sciences. So to kick this off, we had a workshop that several of our ESIP Education Committee members came to, which was great, just this past November at Green Bank Observatory. And we are in the process now of finalizing the report from that workshop. I just pulled out a couple of the findings, one of which is about K-14 community education programs being valuable resources for testing the acceleration of Earth space science convergence, as the data used in each individual program often spans multiple disparate scientific domains. So that's a really important role that your classroom work plays. And how, again, educating both the current and the next generation to embrace complexity and use a variety of data tools, including sophisticated AI-driven data tools, will be essential for accelerating the convergence of Earth space science. So again, it's kind of the other way around. That's what's going on in the classroom is really going to play, is playing, and will continue to play a very key role in this Earth space convergence. And just to give you an idea of some of the really cool things that came up during the NERIAD workshop in November, this is on the one side, it's how one tool, which is called 3D Slicer, which was originally developed at Harvard Medical School for analyzing radiology slides, is actually very useful in astronomy. And 2 labs at Harvard have actually joined forces. They are calling themselves astronomical medicine, which I just thought was a really great example of a kind of convergence that's happening in these big data worlds. Whoops, that's me. And I'm on my last slide. And I grabbed this, I snagged it from Kirk Borner. Kirk Bourne is his name. If any of you are familiar with Kirk, he's had 20 years or so of working in this field, and I really liked it. I love the fact that he merged these 2 Vermeer paintings of the astronomer and the geographer. And again, just very quickly, he's pointing out about how the teaching of astronomy or geography within the informatics-focused context of big data and data science, using national geography education standards and how those standards could apply to data science education within either the geography or the astronomy curriculum. So that's, again, just a quick sort of intro into what the work that we've been doing with ESIP and with AUI, with NERIAD and data literacy that brings us here today to work with you all.
So thanks, Catherine. And I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about convergence not convergence. We've been talking all day about convergence, but this idea of participatory design and what it means for teaching and learning. Let me just bring that up. And I need to share this, right? Let's make sure we're sharing. Okay. Okay. So I just want to take a few minutes to introduce this idea of participatory design. Probably some of you are already familiar with it. Maybe you've actually worked with it. I just want to make sure that there's we all sort of know what we're talking about, and obviously keeping in mind that this is really just a sort of a little bit of a taste of it, because the process to do it right takes a long time and a lot of direct involvement. So I guess to start with, let's talk about what it is. So it's really an approach to develop design teams in which the people that use the software, products, processes, whatever's being designed, doesn't have to be software, are the ones that actually design it. It's contrasted with traditional design in which professionals just create tools either for their own use and hand them off to others, or try to adapt the tools they use for novice users' needs. Instead, participatory design includes the members of a wider community of stakeholders, from the users who are directly affected by the design to policymakers and citizens, teachers, students of all stripes, to gather, analyze, and draw conclusions from data to address their own questions and make their own decisions about how to respond to it. So the users are involved in the design process from the very beginning, not just brought in later to test stuff that other people have already created. And the important thing is that each user or stakeholder brings their own perspective to the design, and professional scientists, software developers, and visualization and user interface designers are not privileged over these users. The goal is to create usable and practical tools and approaches that are compatible with, in this case, the needs of teachers, students, and novice users, to help them easily get to and use the data they want, to integrate it seamlessly into practice, adapt it to a variety of classroom uses, and maximize the value of data in teaching and learning. So why do we do this? I guess to start with, a failed product is one that doesn't get used. I have about 27 years experience trying to get remote sensing used by earth science teachers in ways that are scalable, and there are so many things end up in the closet that I think there's room to really think about. Okay, so how do we really bring the teachers in to make these tools work for them, and to develop new tools that they can leverage that are really adaptive to their needs. It entails a constant set of reality checks, asking yourself these questions: does it really work? Would people use it? How are they going to be using it? What are the barriers to using it? When our understanding of the needs of teachers, students, and novice users is based on real findings rather than just assumptions that we make, we have a higher chance of ensuring successful design outcomes that'll more deeply impact learning. And this creates space in a community to develop its own solutions instead of prescribing solutions that are which are created by them. When people are able to give creative, critical input and translate it into usable solutions, we can better cultivate ownership towards the eventual outcomes that we desire. It focuses on community strength rather than its weaknesses by harnessing persons' skills, knowledge, and resources. When people are aware of their ability to offer something positive to the design process, we can build more confident, resilient teaching and learning communities. It involves an open dialogue between various stakeholders. When people are able to understand that there are different and competing positions on an issue, they often develop a more nuanced picture and therefore more open to exploring new solutions and innovations. And finally, it creates opportunities for people to meet and work together with a shared vision. This builds new social capital and strengthens existing networks. When people know one another better, they tend to be more tolerant, trustful, and capable of making change collectively. So what does this look like? We've adopted these from Kurchkova in 2019, these ideas of participatory design that we've called the 6 A's. We actually added number 6 about the process of how we understand whether participatory design is working. So we think about participants' needs to be aware of their participation within the design process. Evidence of authorship includes anything that reveals an understanding of one's progress with respect to the design process. Participants assume authority over the design process by amending the process itself in a constructive fashion. So it's truly collaborative. You're working together, you're changing things, and extending the design discussion in constructive and unpredictable ways. So you don't start at the outset with a plan that you know is going to end in a particular place. Everybody's involved in it, and it can take a turn. The extent to which participants' design contributions reflect the needs and interests of their profession is important for authenticity. More authentic designs are more likely to be adopted. And then selecting the customizing the aesthetics of emerging design products and responding to the aesthetics of emerging designs need to be evident. Then there's attachment, which is about ownership and authorship. An aspect of the design can be socially acknowledged and associated with its creator. Attachment supports and sustains authorship and encourages autonomy and authenticity. And finally, this is the one we added, appropriation emerges through the design process, the core concept of which is the adoption or adaptation of a design element or perspective generated by someone else in the service of the design aims. And because it's a safe place for everyone to have input and provide feedback to each other, you're safe to actually adopt other people's work, modify it, and feed it back into the system. So the participatory design process is messy. It involves different kinds of brainstorming, design sessions, depending on the goals. Everything from ideation about the kinds of data and tools you imagine you'd be using personally, up through prototyping and testing user interfaces for everybody. Much of this doesn't need to be very high tech because the most important tool that you bring to this is your imagination and the social interactions during the sessions. So what we're going to try to do today is actually have a little bit of a focus group. I hope it's okay that I brought some recorders just to make sure we don't miss anything. We're not going to keep any identifiable information. We'll simply be using this to amend our notes, and then we'll erase it immediately. But hopefully in the next session, we'll be able to make sure we capture everybody's feedback. So this will be something that we'll ask. We have a set of a few prompts to help draw out your ideas and perspectives on Earth and space science. Then after that, we'll have a demonstration and hopefully an introductory exercise to do some design mock-ups of what you'd like to see in your sort of your perfect world scenario of teaching and learning with space and Earth science. Something we hope will eventually be extended and build real tools in service of teaching and learning, which will require a little more financial support, which we'll go after once we have done some of this. So I appreciate the time to talk a little bit about this. And what do we have?
Great. Yep. This is where we get to the real core of the work today. Our teachers, I think there's 6 of you. Is that right, Becky? There's all 6 are here?
There's 5.
5. We're gonna
try to get you a little bit closer together and ask you some questions and get some feedback. We'll pass the mic around, but we'll also, if you don't mind, if anyone objects, just say so. If you don't mind, I'll just be turning on some recorders. These are the ones we use for kids, and they were essential because we had to translate between English, Mandarin, and Spanish, and some of them mix the languages. So when I sent it off to the translator, they were like, "Wait a minute, you know, we have translating between 3 different languages." So can we have people kind of
Patrick, would you mind moving in just a
a
little
little bit,
closer here?
maybe just set.
Not if you're not filming. Let's go.
Yay.
Just yell down through the camera thing so the people online can see who's talking. You're gonna do that? Okay, I'll just hold this. Nope.
Great. So as Steve said, first of all, any questions about anything I talked about or Steve? Anybody again wants any links? Any work happens in- Yeah. Okay. Yes. The big data.
We're gonna ask you guys, if you're speaking, to speak in the microphone so that it gets recorded and the online folks can
The
hear.
online folks can hear it.
Right.
In the microphone, so when possible.
A little unnatural day.
So we obviously, we don't want to talk at you, we want to talk with you. And we came up with some questions, but these are very open-ended. The idea of this is to have really to have a conversation with you to find out what you're thinking, what you need. And we'll just start. Is that okay? And this is not a formal, these are just prompts for a discussion, so very informal. Oh, I think it's on. Is it on? Now it's on. You just got to talk. You got to talk this way. Yes, Shelley. Yes. Sure.
I think, yeah.
Absolutely.
Based on the fact that we have people from amazing places here, we should
Yeah.
have them all chime in. It's just, we weren't anticipating having so many people. So, yeah, so anybody who wants to join in or pull your chair up or sit and listen. And if you have a comment, we can pass you the microphone or a question.
Right. Thanks, Shelley.
Thank you.
So here's a question. If there were no constraints, what kinds of experiences would you like to bring to your students to engage them with Earth or space science or both? If there were no constraints.
I would want them to be engaged in both. I always envision field trips. Oh, sorry. I always envision field trips for my children to go to the Chesapeake Bay, but we always have to worry about insurance, safety in the water, and being able to collect specimens not only from that area, the creatures that they have in the bay, and also in the surrounding areas, they have a um, forest type area where the deer come and they can collect specimens for the soil and then the compare and contrast of everything that's going on in the area. So that would, I don't know how they would record that in their Jupyter notebooks, but then they would compare that to, we have a retention pond in the back of our school in a forest area that is preserved. We've had all types of creatures come out. We've had snakes, buttocks and deer, wild geese, turkeys, and this is right down the street from NOAA where they've collected the fossils. So I envisioned more field trips for them to go out and look at the data and how it affects them.
As we study climate change in 8th grade, a lot of the kids are unsure about whether they think it's real or not, and what evidence do we have? I'd like to have more evidence on that. When we study hurricane seasons, you'll see things from extremes all over the place. People making wild claims and people making fewer claims about why we have stronger and more intense hurricanes and why there seem to be more of them. And that's just that hurricanes are something that interests my students. I'd like to be able to get data to have them look at that and maybe even use our weather bug data that we have at our school to compare to what the similar data in similar decades were up to 100 years ago.
I wanted to second that. I think data sources is something that we struggle with finding the, appropriate data sources or a multitude of data sources that kind of go the varied levels that even our students are with. We use the NOAA buoy, CBIB technology quite a bit in Annapolis. We can measure, we can go back to dates where we know like Superstorm Sandy came through and you can see the differences in there. The problem with the buoys is that they aren't always online. You can't always get the record. My math teachers are often asking me what data we can use, and that's something that I want to provide for them. But yeah, I think that's definitely data sources is a big thing for us.
I guess I kind of second all of that. My particular that, and I guess I'll just kind of dogpile onto this stuff. As far as field trips, there's aspects of what I teach in Earth Systems that are literally untouchable by my students. So the ability to take a virtual field trip that's more experiential, because my students today live in a world that is in 20-second snippets on things like TikTok or YouTube or whatever of people doing things, and they think that that is real and that's where they live. But my science is based on PowerPoint or in a textbook if I crack that open. And any way that I could take them on a more virtual trip would be better, whether that's a trip that I take and take them on with me, similar to the way we're videoing this, or if it's something that somebody else does where they can interact with that individual. That's something that we don't have. And as far as data is concerned, after a long career in government, I know what all the data is, but to prepare it quickly enough to be consumed by my students, I could do it, and I did it for many an admiral and many a government agency, but being able to do it in enough time as a teacher between 4 o'clock in the morning when I wake up and 6 o'clock when I arrive at school is nearly impossible. So sort of, if we know what the hot topics are, any way that we could bundle that data and display it in a way that a teacher could explain, hey, here's the reality, or if we want to dig deeper, you want to send students in to dig for themselves to answer those questions of, well, why did they give us a 2-hour delay today for ice when in fact we saw none where I live? That's always their question. So that's where probably more than you wanted to know.
So this is an aside, but I was just wondering if we could, because you all are on the Potomac side of the world, I am on the Chesapeake Bay side. Why can't we do something for each other to stimulate that? I mean, we work a lot with the Bay Foundation. They offer great trips. We've done a lot of data sourcing through them and through a lot of the things, but there's no reason why we couldn't use this forum to prepare something for each other and maybe do like a virtual classroom as well. So yeah. So based on what my program is, we take field trips once a month to varying different places like Baltimore Harbor to look at different things up there, to explore the trash wheels and see how they're collecting trash and cleaning up the Jones Falls. But at the same time, we're looking at water quality. We have a retention pond at our school as well. So it sounds like we have a lot of similar sources to do some data. It would be kind of interesting to compile all of that into a venue where we could use each other's information and then take us in with a camera on your field trip and then share that information with everyone else.
Sorry. When I would go visit different parts of the world, I would either, if I was allowed to, take the specimen, hold it up, and then send it back to the classroom And also we had teachers from Taiwan and China. They have a program where they would do in-house and they would live with some of our families at our school. And they taught the children Mandarin, and then we have total immersion for English also. So what they would do is when they went back to China, they would send me the pictures, the ones that could, of what they were doing in their classroom. So I think that's a good idea with the virtual sharing of the information, because you say, well, this is my class this year.
So related to this, and as I was brainstorming this a little bit more, I thought about a research article I had seen about the use of MRIs in where students could ask for data on, and I think this was about an egg, and they were looking at egg development as it was going on, and if there are scientists in the field collecting data, if there was some way, I mean, we even, when I was in Antarctica, the internet had just started. Now we can real time communicate. In fact, not too many years ago, they did surgery via remote access. I think it would be fascinating to have those kind of data sets where they're collecting it in the field. And as the researchers are scrubbing their raw data, maybe a rough cut of that data provided into the classroom would be of interest to me, to be able to work through that with a subset of my students. This isn't my entire student population, wouldn't necessarily be capable of doing that. But I think I know for a fact I have a bunch that would love to do that kind of stuff.
And that's the other thing you said about some of your students are going to be more open to studying the data, where some students, they just shut down. Everything has to be presented in bytes via or YouTube. And so I agree with him that we have to find a way to get more students interested in, like, oh yes, I do want to go collect the data. That's going to be good for me. I know that even though I live here, I still can collect information.
One of our experiences has been getting students to actually come up with their own research ideas and they're much more apt to very aggressively collect and have rigorous data if they know they're the ones who are going to have to clean it and then analyze it. And if they're working in teams, then they can, the burden doesn't necessarily fall on one person. But we've had people, take, paper surveys, spend a whole day putting that data into an Excel spreadsheet, erasing it and having to do it over again, and being perfectly willing to do that because they knew this is what they needed to do to get to the result that they wanted, and not just handing their data off to somebody else or taking somebody else's data. They had to create it and they had to clean it and they had to analyze it. So all of a sudden you have this vested, you have time and energy invested in this, and they really care about the data. They're very invested in it.
I'm curious if any of you have used real citizen science platforms and had your students directly submit like iNaturalist and DataStream. Yeah.
I gave that website to my fourth graders to start collecting some of the data for animals outside that they see. I was sharing with one of the participants here. I had never seen a Patuxent deer. I actually had to go, when I took the picture, I thought it was a Dalmatian. I had to go find out what it was. And they said, oh, I think I saw that in the back and we thought it was a dog. I'm like, no. So we had Patuxent deer. We were looking for turkey vultures. We had wild turkeys down the street, alligator snapping turtles. So we use that form she was speaking about, and they're kind of excited about that. But sometimes when they get home, they're like, I don't know what, I'm not looking up anything.
Sadly enough, iNaturalist is not approved by Anne Arundel County Public Schools because there's a blogging feature. So I know. So if you know of any other citizen science documentaries, something as along the line of iNaturalist, I'd appreciate knowing that. Plant Snap and Arbor Tree. maybe arbitrary.
I don't know as much about it, whether it's like as easy to submit to as iNaturalist, but data stream.
Since we're throwing these out there, the Isaac Walton Foundation runs Salt Watch. That's one that my school is involved in, and I think with all of us here in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, it's a big deal for our watershed.
There's also eBird out there for birds.
eBird. Yeah, so that's one thing that's wonderful, because one of the things that we do fight is access to information for kids, because it does have to be safe. And even just that teeny bit of blogging, which I didn't even know, restricted our use of that. I have a question for my Waldorf folks. We have done some work with NOAA and Mallows Bay. Have you done any recording there?
As far as Mallows Bay is concerned, we're just now cracking the door into getting there. Our student population is where we appear to be in a rural area. They're very much an urban class of student. So their desire to step in the mud is like zero. Now, that said, I did drag a couple of them out the other day, and they found it fun and interesting. So Mallows Bay is one of those places where we're starting to head into. You've got my mind racing now, so I've got all kinds of things in there. And I need to drop some of it out before it gets lost. One of the things that I find incredibly interesting when we talk about citizen science, or for instance, the idea of geo-rectified data, that understanding that the data you collect as a citizen may in fact be important, became obvious when our particular weather station died, and suddenly DHS and FEMA and National Weather Service all were up in arms because our data stream stopped. And we didn't realize why until I looked at the geo-rectified data set and realized that our observation was the only one in a gigantic black hole. And so it became important. It didn't come with grant money, but but it obviously became important. But I think presenting that to students to see that their particular data, even just expressing to them where the information they collect and why it's important, and why when they look at their phone and it says, this is the weather where you are, it's probably not where you are. That education is important to them. And that's, I think, part of data and science literacy.
When you talk again, going back to that circle question, that no constraints, one of the things that we think about all the time are like, wouldn't it be great if we had? And we don't have the time necessarily to come up with pulling the data for the kids to do the activity for the teachers, because it might be like 1/8 of a snippet of their curriculum where we can make that connection to the environment. So like one of the data sources that we really wanted to do was we wanted to look at like that saltwater and the freshwater inclusion once the Susquehanna opens, and what happens when the gates open at Conowingo as it rushes down. I mean, we've had signs in Annapolis that say, by way of Pennsylvania natural wildlife, there is no dumping here, and they're coming right at the Bay Bridge. So we've seen a lot of differences locally from some of our local Magathie River Association, Severn River Association, about the different types of critters that are living in the bay and how they seem to be moving around because they're looking for the higher salinity. But like having that data and figuring out how to get that quick enough that we can make that implication, because if a teacher comes to me and says, do you have this? If I don't immediately have it and I can't turn it to her in 12 hours, then I've lost the opportunity.
I'd like to see, since we're a county system here, we could reach out so many more kids. It'd be really nice to have a partnership between a group like Globe, the Globe program, and our county system, so that all our teachers can get training and we can learn to use that. I bring some data into the classroom, and some of the other science teachers look at me like, no, we don't have enough time to learn all that stuff. So, as you say, teach it in eighth. And our curriculum has become much more strict and structured and strict over the last 10 years. And that's okay, in that it helps a lot of teachers who didn't teach a lot of science before, but those of us who want to incorporate more, as you know, that limits us, and it makes it difficult. And without the training for all the teachers, it's not going to probably happen in a lot of places, and may not be allowed even for those of us who really want to do that.
I just wanted to tie into what you were saying about the citizen science and teaching the kids that it relates to a higher, entity or whatnot. I don't know if you're aware of the Globe Observer app, but there's 4 protocols supported on there, and the clouds protocol, which is one of the easier ones to do. There are researchers at Langley that use that clouds data, and they've already published some scientific papers where that data set is cited. So I think that would be a great way to engage kids, because they hear NASA, and when they see that their data is actually being used for scientific publications, I think that would be something that would really engage them. But to go back to what you were saying about getting teachers to use a program like Globe, I'm not a teacher, but I understand there's a lot of barriers because of having to meet education standards, I guess. So I'm wondering if one of these no constraints things or nice to haves would be if a program like that, went and tried to map their what they offer to education standards, such that you could, spit this report out, let's say, and hand it to your, coordinators or whatever, I don't know what you call them, and say like, look, we can use this because it ticks all these boxes. So. And I do think that's something that they are actively working on now, but I'm not involved in that piece of it, so I don't know how long it's going to take for that to, be made available. But
I just had a thought. We had talked a little bit about the student-centered idea, and I think that one of the great sources that we could use to keep that student-centered stuff is if you're doing anything along the lines of watershed. Chesapeake Bay Foundation has the Meaningful Watershed. It's a MWEE, MWEE. And they have a lot of resources on their website that basically a MWEE is a student-guided project. So having the kids come up with their own idea, whether it's a class idea or an individuals or groups, and then they can come up with data sets and have them find data sets on their own that can support some of that knowledge. That might be something. I know there's a sea level rise indicator that even has photographs and certain images where you can look at Cambridge at high tide, at 3 foot, at 6 foot, and what it looks like, and it's actually a visual, so the kids can actually see the street light, get smaller and smaller as the waters rise. And then there's some stuff on Dorchester County, because that's the one that seems to be hitting a lot, where it seems to be seemingly more underwater. But the MWEE was one way when we talked about student-centered that just kind of popped in my head.
The thing that's kind of that my mind has drifted over to now is about visualization of this data, where we talk about little videos and the kids get caught up in that. What I've noticed is that I worked with Patrick not too long ago to not create, but to leverage a data set that was on the Science on a Sphere that Charles County's lucky to have, but it's incredibly underutilized. But once the students saw it, that captured their imagination, and my ability to easily jump into a Google Earth type application or Whirlwind or whatever app you want and develop my own way to take georectified data sets and apply it to a globe type situation. But even the idea of showing right now I have to, if I have the wherewithal, and I know because of my previous experience that I can jump to a few different websites that I happen to have bookmarked from my professional life, where I can show them the Puerto Rican earthquake or the volcano in New Zealand in real time because I happen to have known about it. Their context isn't necessarily there, and to be able to take that and connect it to other concepts that we've already covered in Earth science or Earth system is difficult without being able to have a single sort of display space. I mean, in my perfect world, I'd have a Science on a Sphere hanging in my classroom, and I'd be able to spin that bad boy around and you know, and put different layers on there to teach what I needed to teach right then and there. And if a kid went a different direction on me, I'd say, well, let's look that up and do a quick search, pop up whatever data set happened to be there in that easily tagged format that allowed it to be discoverable. So all the things that I'm reading on these posters out here are fantastic if we can get that technology in the classroom.
So one of the easy things that I just remembered and I looked up because you said visualization was I have a business partner that does data storytelling. So she's an artist and she draws based off of data, and she has another colleague who does it even on a more professional. But for the kids that are not so math science based, to kind of those like me that carry a pouch of coloring things, can actually draw pictures that represent the data and how they read the data to help with their interpretation skills. That's something that she's been working on that I have become more and more interested in, that I think is a great way of getting the more non-math science kids involved, and that they can too interpretate data in their own way.
About 4 or 5 years ago, I came up with the idea with the art teacher. So whenever we have science and art, we mix them together for the data. And so we started to collaborate a book. I walk into Barnes and Nobles, and what's there? The book we were thinking about. So they did have a book out that has science, and they wrote down some of the data collection. And so the children were engaged and they loved it. They that part they did right. And because it's like, I don't have to do math right now. I'm good at this and I can write that down, and I love to color. So
We do that. One example that we have is the Gitaku, the Japanese fish printing. They used the fish printing to actually count and survey the diversity of their catch. So we talk a little bit about that history of that, and then they create these art pieces that we get to hang out. So last year we did it with our teachers and let them do the printing, which was fun.
One thing I would like to really kind of see happen is throughout the state, because we have the Maryland Science Center in Baltimore here, and a lot of people do come by and visit it. It'd be nice to have a presentation for something based on national science standards that we know will be in a curriculum, and maybe have some lessons that can become standardized throughout the state. And when a student comes by to see the science on a sphere, they can have that lesson or that visualization presented to them, and they get to see the data on a globe that that about a lesson they learned. I know, like, there was one I saw at Goddard on hurricanes that turned out it was 2005, and it just showed all the hurricanes all over the earth, and kids were just amazed by that. So if they could tie that into a curriculum, and I know in Montgomery County we're really standards driven and test driven. So if we could incorporate something like that, and any student that went to the Science Center, either on their own or through a class, could then see something they just learned about and visualized on the whole earth, that would be, I think that would be a great experience for them.
We should talk. No, but yeah, I think and it's good to hear that, because I was sitting here and, you know, not a classroom teacher, but working in an informal kind of science education center where like we don't have students, you know, for a whole year. We have them for an hour and a half to 2 hours. So it's hard to build like a relationship. So that's why I haven't said anything, because it's kind of hard to fit in with this. But I think like what Jake was saying with being able, you know, if you had a science on the sphere in your classroom, it would be amazing. And I think what would be great is if, like, you know, if companies had a science on the sphere, for example, but even only having one, if there were less constraints even then, to, if Jake as teacher says, I need to go use the science on the sphere today, you know, and he can just go do it, you know. Right now it's all perfectly scheduled with the curriculum, you know, for the entire county, so you don't have a lot of time. But I think it would be wonderful if the teachers felt more comfortable to come to the Science Center on their own and use it that way. But we do have field trips available too. Pardon? Also in Waldorf at the James E. Richmond Science Center. So it's primarily for Charles County students. It's a free field trips for all of them, but non-CCPS can come as well. It's just not free. And so we have the Science on the Sphere, large planetarium, labs, things like that. It's like a mini museum.
Just a quick question. So SOS Explorer would be the same thing, right? And then teachers could use that in their classroom. SOS Explorer, I think it's free. And
Yeah, that is, again, another globe type scenario. One of the things that if we're totally unconstrained, and I was thinking about everything that I've kind of heard here, if we were totally fiscally and time unconstrained, it would, and as a teacher, I am shocked at how little I get paid for how much work I do. So it is purely service. For those who have been teachers for their whole lives, good on you. But one of the things that Patrick and I have had the benefit of being able to do is to sit down and take my curriculum, which has already had map standards to it, and he has data sets that had already been sort of developed by researchers and placed in his hands. We could make we could go that final mile to connect those two things. But if a researcher, and I just kind of scribbled some stuff down here, if a researcher was doing climate science, and that you made me think of this a little bit, how do we take stuff from this gigantic concern that is a national level concern, or international really, when you think about the poor islands out in the Pacific that may lose their entire kingdom, right, over climate change, that how do we make that matter to the student who has to make the choice of whether or not he's going to buy that next iPhone 11 or 12 or whatever's next, or not, and the climate impact of that? Unconstrained, I need that researcher's data to be translated all the way down to, and the easy scenario to be would say that if a researcher was looking at, the level of non-divergence at 500 millibars, and say, oh, it's varied this much, and as a result, that's a measure of climate change. That doesn't mean anything to anybody. You tell me at climate change down at the bottom level that it's going to affect me because I have to carry my umbrella more often in January on these other years. Now it means something. But that needs to be gone from a researcher to the NGSS standards, to the national standards, mapped to that, so that I then know that then I know how to map it into my content, which then maps it down into, I can map it then to something local to say, if you made this change, this is how it's going to affect up the chain, and that's why your policymakers are saying what they're saying. And I think that's the biggest thing, is making that sight line all the way down through the whole limit. And I don't know how to crack that egg, and I don't know where that's done or who signs up for that, but it seems that bodies like this one might be a place to start making those connections. But if every science center was able to recognize where their data sets matched, or if researchers were required when principal investigators were required to say, this is where it matches in NGSS, now we can say, okay, your research is now valid, because whatever comes out of it is going to drive the little human that she teaches in the elementary school to say, I now know. So when they grow up, they know that if I, am, using a plastic bottle and throw it away, that microplastic is going to end up in an oyster in the Chesapeake Bay as a result of some researcher that says, I found it in Solomon's Island. Like, to me, that's the ideal. That's huge, by the way. So have at it.
Yeah, I was going to say that's what we're working on. Like you said, that have the little ones to just see, and even the plastic part that you mentioned. Some students are prone to just throw a bottle of water in the trash when it's halfway empty if they have it. And I'm flabbergasted. I said, don't your parents tell you that it's going to be in the bay. We consume supposedly this much, your pinky, plastic a day through the air because of the microfibers and because of the water. So why wouldn't you tell your child, don't do that, like you said, at a young age so that they know that it's important and that we don't want to eat the plastic in the bag. So I agree with you that the course that you want to take is going to help. And we're all responsible for the children, so.
This is a incredible conversation that's happening here. I think everybody in the room would agree. And I did want to tell you, and I meant to and forgot, that next week we are holding a 2-day workshop funded by National Science Foundation on exactly this question at the high school level: how to incorporate data science into the computer science curriculum. Of course, we actually think it should be in all curriculum, as you know, we've been discussing. But just so you know that this is recognized on the part of the National Science Foundation to be a real problem that has not yet been solved. And the College Board, yeah, they do know. And they know, and actually it's because teachers and students rebelled and said, you know, the data doesn't work for the students. The students said, this isn't, we can't hack it. I mean, you all may have had these experiences that with things that were curriculum that were handed to you that just was not working for you, or more importantly for your students. So this is happening. It is being worked on, but your perspectives are so important. And we only have until 12:30. Ellie was going to do a demo. Well, let's do a time check, because I know we really want to have you guys do a little actual design if you're up for it, and maybe with the people in the room. And we're kind of running out of time, so you know, if that sits well with everybody. I pulled out just a few ideas, but it's as examples of things that came out of your conversation, real problems that need to be addressed, like finding data sources, preparing the data quickly enough. This idea of a collaboration, a forum amongst all of you was a wonderful idea. This problem, which I wasn't aware of enough, about security and access issues, and that tools that might be designed for the classroom really aren't appropriate because the school can't use them or won't allow them to be used. And this visualization idea and data storytelling in real time, and how valuable that would be. So those are just a few ideas that to me sound like they would, you know, feed into a kind of dream tool design, as it were. So
it might, we actually had a bunch of other prompts. You've answered various parts of them through the conversation. This has been amazing. I wish we could have you guys for a week. But so we have about 20 minutes. One thing we'd like to try to do is get you to maybe do some more ideation and sort of articulate a little bit of these things. We normally do this as a kind of a storyboarding. So actually putting together, you know, drawing what your sort of dream tool or visualization or connection, it could be a diagram that says, we would like to be able to connect these things together with this kind of thing, or something purely narrative that just says, this is what we want. Or, and this is another possibility, do a little storyboard to say, we would like to be able to do these kinds of things in this order, or with these kinds of relationships. So the idea is to just purely sort of brainstorm a little bit like you were doing in this sort of focus group that we were just doing, but actually drawing and ideally breaking up into a couple of groups. And well, there's no reason not to have others join in and be part of the discussion. And we'd like this to be sort of emergent. So taking sort of this idea that, you know, what do we think our dream tool, our dream, you know, way of getting to data, the kind of data we want, what do we want for our students, how long does it take to get there, what do we want to be able to give them and when, those kinds of questions start to sort of ask yourselves, And based on some of the feedback from a lot of these people that have talked already, to be able to say, okay, we'll just take some of these easel pads and just start to draw some of these things out. Does that make sense to people? Does that sound like a useful pursuit?
Oh, good.
Okay. And of course, we'd like others to join in. We have, well, these amazing communities all together in the same room. It would be really great to see them work together. But just for the sake of trying to keep this in wieldy enough, we have originally decided to break it into two groups. There are a lot more people here, but I think if we just take sort of sides, and people can sort of
You could stick some of these on the walls.
yeah. So as you're drawing, we could
I mean, you could start that way, so you don't have to start with two people.
yeah.
More than two.
We, well, I think the idea is to commingle and
I'm gonna
to
pull
really
up a bunch of
have
different-
emergent ideas.
a bunch
So,
of the tools that they-
and if you need any other,
So I'm gonna, oh, it's okay. Okay, so I think that I'm gonna pull up a bunch of the tools that they just mentioned, and then they can like look, we can scroll through them.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
We also have stickies if people want to use stickies to put ideas together and rearrange them. We had pens and stickies.
Snap tree.
There's pens and stickies here. If people would like to use them.
Or what was it? Snap? Plant snap? Was it plant snap that they said? Plant snap? Yeah, there we go.
Get a buddy. Are you guys drawing? There's more pens.
Yeah, so they have all these different maps, and then this one shows. So the areas that are yellow are in drought. And then so you could go to one, these are citizen scientists that are submitting their observations. So let's see, maybe that person.
Okay.
And so like staying off the trails, longer days, more sunlight. So it just is like a way for students to say, oh, like people will say, I saw this type of deer, or I saw like this new type of animal is coming in, and it's like, or let's say that the grass is turning brown, or all of this stuff. So it's just like general observations, and you just can submit it as a school, as a classroom, like once a week.
Yeah, I can't wait to do that. Because for some reason we were seeing crazy stuff. We saw a wolf.
You saw a wolf?
We saw it was not a coyote. I know what a coyote has long legs.
Yeah, and they're small.
Someone, they were nervous. It was in PG County, and they never put a different type of animal was found running around. And my girlfriend, and the reason why I know is my girlfriend, she called me, she took a picture, and she looked at it. She said, what is that? I said, she said, oh, what? I said, that's a wolf. She said,
Oh
what?
my gosh.
That's what she said.
That's so cool.
So I don't,
I mean, that's
not
crazy.
cool, but I think somebody had to be keeping that because his coat was clean. I'm like, that doesn't look
No,
right.
that doesn't look, yeah.
Yeah, we saw a coyote a few times. I mean, they're around here, but
yeah.
not in the city, so close.
No, yeah.
But this is fabulous. I would love to record this.
Yeah, I think maybe they'll send out an
This
email
is
with
called,
like,
yeah,
conditions.
please
on
send
it.
that to me.
I think that they're gonna send out a whole list of like all these
I
different.
gotta pick one.
Yeah.
My kids are like,
They're
I'm
all
just as
over.
bad as them. I'm over all over the place too.
Yeah, this is nice because you can report everything that you see. It's not like just animals or just plants or anything. And then so these lines that are here are, that shows different types of drought. So like how severe the drought is.
That doesn't look so great.
Yeah. So
because usually I know the entomologists collect in the Midwest because I'm a graduate from the University of Kansas.
Okay, yeah.
So they collect, it's like a dust bowl on these two, and they said they collect it, but if it's that dry,
yeah, it's not so good.
That's not so good. Look at that.
Yeah, and like down here in Texas, it's very dry.
Yeah, I'm used to that being dry,
and so people talk about that.
Ooh. Yeah, my cousin said who studies the disease, the epidemiologist.
Yeah.
They don't tell you what's going on because she said it was pandemonium.
Yeah.
Yeah, she said all of the diseases that used to come out of there when I was there. So I've been out of school for like, my son is 19 years. There was a plethora of insects because you can drive through and it looked like your car got slimed at night. It was all glowy from all so many lightning bugs. So I'm sure the conditions would be changed by now.
Yeah, definitely.
Wow.
But yeah, so the people who are determining like these drought designations, they look at all of the people who are reporting.
Look, with me, I'm thinking this is my boarding school. I'm ready to slide the map over. Sorry.
It's okay. But like I'm from South Carolina, so I work with the climate
University of South Carolina.
Yeah, University of South Carolina. And the state climatologist actually looks at this, and they all get on a call every week, or I think it's every week they get on a call, and they decide like, are we in drought or not? And they look at this, and they've actually like changed where there is drought based on what people like. Right now there isn't drought because we've been getting a lot of rain.
Yeah, but that's not normal.
Yeah,
that's not normal.
Really interesting.
What else? That's not normal because they're on the coastline.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
And like right here too, and that's Maryland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we lived near a reservoir, like we used to have a big forest, and they said that we voted for the interconnector to go through. I didn't vote for that. So people's homes, the water levels in there, it smells more moldy. And some of my neighbors' big basement, I said the water doesn't have anywhere to go because they put cement in. So so I'm not surprised.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, the whole thing is because I pay attention to that.
Well, I think that they're gonna send all of this information out.
So. Oh, I'm gonna pay attention to that one. Oh, I'm excited about that.
but it's a good resource.
No, this is great.
Yeah.
What else were you going to show us?
I was just going to show this, and then there are a bunch of, we talked about these, but
Yeah. Oh yeah, we're going to use all of that. As soon as my board comes up, it's going to grab the students' attention a little bit more.
Yeah.
Right now the board is broken. I don't even have anywhere to write. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Kids get bored, so I have to keep going to the library.
Yeah, keeping their attention. Keeping their attention is very.
For a couple of things, having that set off to the side of the geographic plot, just so they see it together. And we have, obviously, we have the constraints. My screen is not that big. I do not have a lot of room to.
Yeah, so that actually, I was at that.
Probably in about my projector is close to the screen this big. So to even give them if we weren't constrained technologically, I would love to have the geographic display with that data set. Now, again, there's a lot of data sets. There's a lot of things that are supposed to happen that's data they don't as far as this stuff. Yes, I'm playing the team. They just gave up. It did hold to the state. But I think if I can show this stuff, and I can spend the time teaching them, I think visualization and better self-exploring would give them a better literacy. There are times, because I found that I just recently put a bunch of self-learning stuff in place. I'm a second year teacher. So I just basically put them into this self-learning routine. Questions to ask. I'll roam around. And they're starting to really dig in. I think if they had the ability to dig in and see things change, they'd understand the plots.
Do you think it would be too much to put in a sort of data literacy layer on that? You click on the topic,
here's how you read this.
What it is, short video, like a short video about here's what it's taught. Here's
Little tutorials, yeah.
So that you can actually easily navigate to.
And you can have.
Just kind of curating and
Maybe it is just curated, where it's, but it's curated for the right page level, because when you get to my 15-year-olds, it's a different frame than for elementary schoolers.
Yeah. It seems like if you had a common resource for that stuff, it then could be treated really well. So like, I don't have to make a content video, but let's make a video about the bay, what's going on in the bay, but then they could all kind of work in.
Actually, I like that. concept that just came to me is you have a body like this that wants the world to better understand, to better consume all of this big data that's out there. But there's some big data basics, like how to read a chart, that really doesn't have a central, like I don't know essentially, I can probably find 1,000 YouTubers that says this is what a scatterplot is. Right. But I don't know that I found one that I love. Right. And I don't know that it tells, I don't know, but it'd be nice if this tool had those set.
Yeah, I mean, if you had the curation
And it was grade level appropriate.
Hey, everybody. Hello. Can you hear me? Some of you can hear me. Some of you can hear me. Can you hear me? Sorry to say, it is about 12:29, and the the conference organizers have asked us to end on time, which is 12:30, to get lunch. So we have to officially end, but obviously that doesn't mean you have to at all stop talking. This has been a really amazing hour and a half for us. I hope it has been somewhat, at least a little bit amazing for you guys, educators particularly, but also our ESIP colleagues. And we would love to talk a bit more, perhaps after the next session that the educators are going to be in, about next steps for this educator group. We hope that you're interested in having some next steps and continuing to work together. We certainly would appreciate that and love to work with you. So again, thank you so much. And up on the screen right now, I just wanted to point out, this was the demo that Ellie was going to demo. Sorry, we got into such a inspired conversation. We just ran out of time, but I'm sure Ellie would be happy to give you a demo or talk to you about it. And again, thank you.
And also feel free to leave your card or put your name on a sheet, one of the little little notepads, and leave it for us. We'd love to start to build this community, talk to you guys. I'm thinking particularly the people who attended, who we don't necessarily have their contact information. If you really want to be involved, just leave us your email and your name, and we'll contact you to see if you want to continue to be involved. And thanks very much for everybody being part of this. This has been fabulous.
If we do leave our email, could you send out, whoever does leave an email, like a distribution to everybody, so we have each other's email?
Yeah, we'll make sure that we sort of have a group and that we can.
I actually was going to give you this just so we can, because I have to, I can't be in this session.
If anybody in this room has, from the high school perspective,
so you have my email.
Wants to have a conversation at any time about high schoolers and data literacy or science literacy or whatever, just please, I will put my name on there. Please reach out to me.
Well, and we're here all day. We're gonna have
And I'll
lunch
try
together.
anything in my classroom.
We're gonna have lunch together now. And there's another session that's for educators at 2 o'clock. Then there's the poster session, where it's a great time to have conversations, a little something to eat, a little something to drink. We get lots of things planned. So I invite you to continue the process.